Hi, welcome to the mini lesson on the plot diagram. Before we get started, I'd like for you to think about what the word plot means. Plot just means what happens in a story, in the order that the events occur. Diagram just means a picture. So the plot diagram is just a way to represent what happens in the story using a picture. Take a minute and look with me at this picture here in the middle of your screen. You can see that there's a mountain climber climbing the mountain, trying to get to the top. You might remember in elementary school your teacher referred to the plot diagram as the plot mountain. And this really is a good metaphor for what we call the plot diagram in junior high and high school. You, the reader, are the mountain climber, reading through the story and climbing to the top of the mountain. Just like a mountain climber, as you start at the bottom, it gets harder and harder, and this is the suspense and the tension that starts to increase as you're reading the story, and the main character is getting closer and closer to solving the problem, which is the climax, or the turning point. The objectives for this lesson are for you to identify all parts of the plot diagram, and to be able to define all parts of the plot diagram. Here's just a general picture of what the plot diagram looks like. You can see all the different parts: the exposition, the rising action, the climax or turning point, the falling action, and then the resolution. Now, don't forget the conflict. This is the most important part of the story because it's the conflict that really drives the plot. Think about a story that doesn't have a conflict. It would be really boring. Think about Harry Potter without Voldemort. I think that'd be a pretty boring story. We need the conflict to keep us reading so that we know and we feel the suspense and tension that the main character is having to go through to solve the problem. When you look at the climax of the plot diagram, you know that is when the problem is solved. It's very hard to come up with the rising action in a story until you've gotten to the climax and you know how the problem is solved. So before you try to fill in rising action, I'm going to suggest that you identify the conflict, you identify the climax, and then you can go back and fill in rising action. Don't forget, you're the reader here going up the mountain or reading through the story. Okay, so let's review. Conflict, we know that's the problem or struggle the main character has to overcome, and we can divide it into two categories, internal or external. Exposition. This is the first leg of the plot diagram. Remember, it includes the main characters and the setting. Don't forget, that means when and where in a story. The rising action, this part right here, the major plot events in sequential order leading up to the climax of the story. Sequential just means in the order that things happened. What happened first, second, third, fourth. Now the climax or the turning point, the peak of the story, when the conflict is solved. Don't forget that it's much harder to fill in the rising action until you know how the problem is solved. So when you're trying to fill out a plot diagram, I want you to identify the conflict and the climax and then identify rising action events. Falling action. We're coming down the opposite side of the mountain. This is what happens after the climax leading up to the resolution. The resolution, how the story ends. Literally, what's the last thing that happens in the story? All right, let's practice together. Think back to when we watched the Three Little Pigs video. We're going to use that video again to review the plot diagram. As you watch, I want you to think about each part of it and see if you can identify the story and where it fits.
En tant que propriétaire de mon cabinet privé en droit de la famille, j'exerce principalement.
The Three Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs, and a time came for them to seek their fortunes and build their houses. The first little pig built himself a house of straw. The middle brother decided to build a house of sticks. It wasn't either a very strong house But the third pig, the oldest, decided to build a house of bricks. He did not mind hard work because he wanted a strong house, because he knew that in the woods nearby there was a wolf who liked to catch little pigs and eat them up. When the 3 houses were finished, the 3 little pigs were happy dancing and singing, "Who is scared of Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf? Who is scared of Furious Wolf?" Just as the first little pig reached his door, out of the woods popped up a big, bad wolf. The little pig squealed with fright and slammed the door. Little pig, let me come in," cried the wolf. "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," said the little pig. "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," roared the wolf, and blew the little straw house. Away raced the little pig to his brother's house of sticks. The wolf was really angry, so went behind the youngest pig, the house of sticks, where the pigs were singing, "Who is scared of Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf? Who is scared of Furious Wolf?" Suddenly, the wolf roared, "Open the door, let me come in." "No, we won't," said the pigs. "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow down your house," roared the wolf, and blew down the little house of sticks. The 2 little pigs raced away to his big brother's house of bricks and started to sing, "Who is scared of Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf? Who is scared of Furious Wolf?" This made the big wolf perfectly furious. "Open the door, little pigs, let me come in." "No, we won't." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow down your house." But he couldn't blow down the little house of bricks. He decided to climb and get in through the chimney. So he climbed, jumped down, and fell right into a kettle of boiling water. He sprang straight up the chimney again and raced away into the woods. The 3 little pigs never saw him again and spent their time in the strong brick house, dancing and singing, "Who is scared of Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf? Who is scared of Furious Wolf, Furious Wolf?" The end.
All right, so let's think about the different parts of the story. Were you able to identify the exposition? Who were the main characters? What was the setting? What about the conflict? Were you able to think about what is the problem or struggle facing the main characters? How about a climax or turning point? How was the problem solved? Now thinking about how the problem solved, what are some major events in the rising action? Now, falling point. What happens after the problem is solved, after the climax? And now the resolution. How does the story end? Let's see if you got it right. The exposition. The main characters were the 3 little pigs. The setting, we don't know the exact details, but we can infer it was in the past. Maybe we could say once upon a time, like in a fairy tale. Where? The little pigs' houses in the forest. The conflict. The wolf is trying to capture the 3 little pigs so he can eat them. Rising action. The little pigs leave home. One little pig builds his house of straw, the other of sticks, the third one of bricks. The wolf, of course, tries to blow down each house and does until he gets to the house of bricks. That one he can't blow down. Then he goes up and down the chimney to get to the pigs. That's the last thing that happens before the problem is solved. When the wolf lands in the boiling water and jumps back up and runs away, the little pigs are no longer in danger. That has solved the problem of the wolf trying to get the little pigs. Therefore, it is the climax. It is the turning point. The falling action, the little pigs never see the wolf again. He's gone. And the resolution, the little pigs spent their time dancing and singing. Who scared a furious wolf, furious wolf? So if we were going to draw out the plot diagram, this is what it would look like. Remember, here's our conflict. You must always identify the conflict when you're doing a plot diagram, because without knowing the conflict, you'll never be able to understand or find the climax. Our exposition is here. Our rising action, remember we start at the bottom, first, second, third, fourth, what happens in order, sequential order, leading up to the problem being solved, the climax turning point, falling action, coming back down the other side of the mountain, and the resolution, the little pigs dancing and celebrating and singing. Now I want you to try. In your reader-writer notebook, draw a large plot diagram, and then think about a novel that you're reading right now, or maybe one that you finished. Go back, look in your novel, and try and fill out the different parts of the plot diagram. Looking at the very beginning, who are your main characters? What is the setting that you can identify? What about the conflict? You should have finished reading it. So, can you identify what the conflict was? Or if you're still in the middle of it, you should have a good idea of the conflict, even though you may not be able to decide on the climax yet. See what parts you can fill out. That's the end of this lesson. Hope it helped you.